The cafe was busy, filled with the usual morning rush. People were talking, laughing, and hurrying to get their coffee before heading to work. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and the sound of cups clinking together echoed through the room. Keanu Reeves walked into the cafe. Most people didn't notice him. He wasn't trying to be seen. He wore a simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, just like any other person in the cafe. He didn't try to stand out. But still, there was something about him, something that made people look twice. Maybe it was the way he moved, calm and sure of himself. Or maybe it was the way he carried himself, like someone who had seen a lot in life. He walked up to the counter and got in line. He didn't expect anything special. He just wanted a cup of coffee. But the cafe was crowded, and the barista behind the counter looked distracted. Another worker, a waiter, stood behind the counter as well. He looked impatient, like he didn't want to be there. He kept sighing loudly, tapping his fingers on the counter, rolling his eyes. "The line is so long today," the waiter muttered to himself. Then, as he glanced at the people in line, he started making rude comments under his breath. "People need to hurry up," he grumbled. "Some of us actually have things to do." Keanu stood quietly, waiting for his turn. He didn't say anything about the waiter's attitude. He had seen people like this before, people who didn't realize how their words could affect others. But then, something happened. The waiter glanced at Keanu. He looked at his simple clothes, at the way he stood there so quietly. And then, with a smirk on his face, he said something rude. "This cafe isn't a place for homeless people to hang out," the waiter said. Keanu's eyes met his. He didn't frown. He didn't look angry. But there was something in his eyes, something strong. The waiter, thinking he was funny, laughed a little to himself. He didn't know who he was talking to. He didn't know this was Keanu Reeves, a famous actor. He just saw a man in simple clothes and thought he could make fun of him. He leaned closer, still smirking. "This place is for people who actually know how to dress properly," he added. Keanu still didn't say anything. He just stood there looking at the man. The cafe, which had been full of noise, slowly started to get quieter. People noticed the exchange. They stopped mid-sentence, their eyes shifting toward Keanu and the waiter. The air in the cafe changed. The waiter turned around to grab Keanu's coffee. But before he handed it over, he made one last comment. "Yeah, you better hurry up, man," he said. "I don't have time to wait on the homeless." Silence. Keanu didn't move. He didn't flinch. But something changed in the air. It was as if the whole cafe had frozen. People were watching now, waiting to see what would happen next. The waiter, still thinking nothing of it, turned back around and handed Keanu his coffee with a grin. "Here you go, buddy," he said. "Hope you enjoy it." Keanu didn't take the cup right away. He just looked at the waiter. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. But his eyes held something deep, something powerful. The waiter, who had been so sure of himself, suddenly felt unsure. Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm. "In life we get to choose who we want to be," he said. The waiter blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, still trying to sound confident. Keanu stepped a little closer. His voice was still soft, but everyone could hear him. "You chose to be unkind to someone who did nothing wrong. But the truth is, we never know who we're talking to until it's too late. You made a mistake today." The waiter laughed awkwardly. "Oh, come on," he said. "It was just a joke. No offense." Keanu shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "It's not just a joke. People use jokes to make others feel small. That's not funny." A few customers shifted in their seats. They were really paying attention now. The cafe, which had been so loud just minutes ago, was quiet. The waiter, who had been so confident, started to feel nervous. Keanu looked at him. "You think it's funny to look down on someone?" he asked. "To use your job to make others feel bad?" The waiter had no answer. "But life doesn't always work that way," Keanu continued. "Life teaches us lessons. And when it does, we either stand tall or shrink down." The waiter looked around. People were still watching him. He suddenly felt small. Keanu gave him a small smile, not a mean smile, but a kind one. "Think about your words," he said. "Life has a way of teaching us things. It's better to learn now before it's too late." Keanu finally took his coffee and walked to a table. He sat down and looked out the window as if lost in thought. The cafe slowly went back to normal. People started talking again, but the air was different now. Everyone was thinking about what had just happened. The waiter stood behind the counter, frozen. He looked at Keanu, then at the other customers. He felt different. He had never thought much about the way he treated people. But now, for the first time, he did. Keanu took a sip of his coffee. Out of the corner of his eye, he watched the waiter. He was waiting, wondering what the man would do next. Finally, the waiter moved. Slowly, he walked toward Keanu's table. His steps were hesitant, like he wasn't sure what to do. He stopped in front of Keanu. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to treat you like that. I was just having a rough day." Keanu looked up at him. His face was still calm, still kind. "We all have rough days," Keanu said. "But how we treat others during those days is what really matters." The waiter nodded. He looked down at the floor. He had never seen Keanu this way before. Not as a movie star. Not as someone famous. Just as a person who had spoken to him with kindness instead of anger. And that kindness made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: guilt. "I don't want to make excuses," the waiter said, his voice softer now. "Life's been hard. I guess I took it out on you." He hesitated, then added, "I didn't realize who you were. I thought you were just another person who didn't matter." Keanu smiled. Not because he was happy, but because he understood. "Everyone matters," Keanu said simply. The waiter took a deep breath. He knew Keanu was right. "I'll try to be better," he said. Keanu nodded. "That's all anyone can do." The waiter turned and walked back to the counter, his heart feeling different. The customers who had watched the whole thing smiled a little, as if they too had learned something important that day. Keanu took another sip of his coffee. He had come in expecting nothing special. But today something had changed. Maybe not just for the waiter, but for everyone in that cafe. And with that, the morning rush carried on. But the lesson stayed. Keanu smiled a little and put down his cup of coffee. "We all matter," he said softly. "But sometimes we forget that. We forget that everyone is just trying their best. We forget that being kind can change everything." The waiter's eyes filled with tears. It was like he suddenly understood something very important. Keanu wasn't just telling him to be nicer. He was showing him how kindness could change someone's life. For the first time in a long time, the waiter didn't feel like he was in charge of everything. Instead, he felt like he had a chance to be better. A few seconds passed. The waiter, now feeling emotional, looked at Keanu with true gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching me this. I don't think I could have learned it any other way." Keanu stood up slowly, ready to leave. But before he walked away, he turned back and looked at the waiter one last time. "Remember," he said, "it's never too late to be better. But you have to start now. Change only happens when we take responsibility for what we do." And with that, Keanu walked out of the cafe. The whole place was silent. People looked at each other, unsure of what had just happened. Keanu's words, his kindness, it had touched them deeply. They didn't just see an actor talking to a rude waiter. They saw something much bigger, a real change in someone's heart. And they knew they would never forget this moment. As Keanu walked out, the quiet cafe slowly came back to life. People started talking again, but it wasn't the same as before. Something was different. People sat back thinking. Some stayed silent. Others exchanged glances as if they had all just shared a powerful moment. The waiter, still standing behind the counter, didn't move. His mind was racing. Keanu's words kept repeating in his head. It's never too late to be better. How could he have been so blind? How many times had he treated people badly just because he thought he was more important? Today everything changed. And now he had a choice. He could let this moment pass, or he could let it change him forever. This cafe wasn't just a cafe anymore. It was now a place where people had grown, where something important had happened. As customers left, some nodded at the waiter. A few spoke kind words. Others simply smiled as if they all understood what had just happened. It wasn't just about Keanu anymore. Something deeper had started. The waiter wasn't the only one who felt different. People in the cafe thought about their own lives. They realized they had also been unkind sometimes. They decided silently to be better. To be kinder. To stop judging so quickly. Keanu's words had created a ripple, a small act of kindness that kept spreading. Across the street, a young woman was walking by. She had seen everything happen through the window. She had been struggling with her own problems, feeling lost and unsure of herself. She had heard Keanu's words. And now she wiped away tears. She had always thought she was too weak to change. But now something clicked. Maybe it wasn't too late for her. Maybe she could start fresh. She didn't know exactly what to do next, but she knew one thing. She was going to treat people differently. And she was going to be kinder to herself too. Back in the cafe, the waiter finally moved. His eyes were still soft, still thinking. He hadn't expected that a simple talk with a stranger would change his world. But it did. He took a deep breath, turned to his coworker and said, "I think I need to make things right." His coworker, who had seen the whole thing, nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I think we all do." It was a small step. But it was the first step toward a better future. The cafe wasn't the same anymore. It had become a place of kindness, a place where people started thinking about each other in a new way. And it all started with Keanu. Not as a movie star, but as a person who cared. Outside, as the sun started to set, Keanu sat in his car, watching the city move around him. He didn't know how big of an impact his words had made. But he didn't need to. The ripple had already begun. As he drove away, he thought about his own struggles, the times when life had been hard, when he had doubted himself. But now he understood something very clearly. Sometimes the smallest actions, the gentlest words could change a life. And today he had done just that. Days passed, and the ripples from that one small moment kept spreading. The waiter, now treating people with more kindness, noticed something. People smiled more. They were more patient. They said thank you more often. And he felt happier too. One small moment had changed everything. And the kindness kept growing, like a seed turning into a big, beautiful tree. The quiet wisdom in the cafe spread through the town like wildfire. First, people told each other about what happened, then shared it on social media. Even people who hadn't been at the cafe heard about the encounter. The story wasn't about a famous person stepping in to save someone. Instead, it was about how a small act of kindness and the courage to do what's right, even when things are tough, can make a big difference. The waiter, who had been rude before, started to change. He began treating customers better. He no longer made hurtful comments or ignored people based on how they looked or who they were. More than just changing the way he treated others, he started being kinder to himself. The shame he used to feel turned into the strength to be a better person. He started asking for help when he needed it, opened up to his coworkers, and learned that it was important to be kind to himself. He realized that if he couldn't be nice to himself, how could he be kind to others? One day, while cleaning tables, the waiter looked up and saw a familiar face walking through the door. It was Keanu Reeves. This time, the waiter didn't feel embarrassed or think bad thoughts. Instead, he walked over to Keanu with a real smile on his face, showing respect. "I just wanted to thank you," the waiter said. His voice was filled with honesty and sincerity. "I know I acted badly that day, but your words really stuck with me. I've been trying to be a better person." Keanu looked at him with a calm and understanding expression. "That's all anyone can do," he replied softly. "We're all just trying to do our best every day." The waiter felt tears welling up in his eyes. He nodded, his voice shaking a little. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be better. I don't think I would have changed if you hadn't said what you did." Keanu smiled, but not out of pride. He smiled because he understood the power of his words. Those simple words had sparked a big change in the waiter, but also in everyone who had witnessed what had happened. As Keanu sat down, people in the cafe watched the exchange. It wasn't a big, dramatic moment. There was no show of heroism. It was just two people, one a stranger, the other a well-known figure, connecting over their shared experience of growth and understanding. It was a quiet victory, but it was enough. The real impact of that moment wasn't just about the encounter itself. It was about the change that continued to happen because of it. The waiter's transformation didn't stop there. In the days that followed, he began to share his story with others. He spoke to his coworkers, encouraging them to think more deeply about how they treated people. He told them about the lessons Keanu had unknowingly taught him. Lessons about kindness, empathy, and how even the smallest actions can make a big difference. The customers who had witnessed Keanu's words also started to think differently. The next time they saw someone being treated unfairly, they remembered Keanu's message. They spoke out, helped, and chose to be kind. They too had been changed. The story of that cafe encounter, Keanu's words, and the waiter's transformation wasn't something that stayed in just one moment. It kept living on in the hearts of everyone who had seen it. It continued to inspire people to be better, to do better, and to remember that their actions, no matter how small, can make a big difference in the world. In a world where people are often quick to tear each other down, it only took a few kind words to start a lasting change. A change that spread far beyond that small cafe. It reminded everyone that kindness is never too small to matter and never too late to start. As Keanu left the cafe for the last time, he looked back over his shoulder. He didn't know it yet, but the effects of his simple actions had come full circle. What started as a small act of compassion had grown into something much greater than he could have imagined. As he walked down the street, the city around him seemed a little brighter, a little kinder. And that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.